I know what the problem is. And the problem is that, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about, the moral aspect, and we're talking about the market aspect. These are separate things. Then, like Matt said, it's not a simple solution. There is no, you fix it with XYZ. You can't do either one. You have to fix this problem and this problem. Okay, hi, and welcome to the Johnny Random Show. Today is the healthcare debate. I've been putting this one off for a little while just to make sure that we cover some other bases on this channel before we got to this one. We are again on Patreon. We have a Patreon, we have the YouTube channel, and we have Spotify, Apple Podcast, and a couple more. So we're getting around to different places. Of course, there are reactions on this channel. There are all sorts of things on this channel, not just politics. We did one on aliens last week. But today is going to be pretty political. It's kind of getting back to that a little bit today. We're going to talk about the healthcare debate. So without further ado, my angle on this, I always try to give a little bit of something different than maybe you're used to in other debates. But I'm going to go ahead and make some sort of assumptions up front that I think are true and kind of give us a place to start here. I think that the healthcare system in the United States is pretty broken. As someone who's worked in the healthcare for a long time, for the last decade, I think that I can say that pretty confidently, and that's shouldn't be too much of a shock to people that are in the system or have ever used our healthcare system. So it's pretty broken. So I very much want to be sort of on the idea of what are solutions, what are possible solutions, what are pros and cons. Been thinking about this a lot over the years, and a lot more this week since we're trying to put this episode together. So this is going to be just a lot of different things. Is healthcare a right or is it a business? Because that's where, to me, the debate goes off the rails. Because I feel like on the right side of the political spectrum, they want to talk about healthcare as a business. And if you're thinking about healthcare as a business, you're thinking about markets, and you're thinking about how to get the best optimal outcomes, right? And then if you're thinking about it as everyone should be entitled to, healthcare, it is a right. And it's something that, if a lot of people like to throw out on the left, is so we're the richest country in the world, we should have healthcare for our entire population. So if you're coming at it from that point of view, it just fundamentally, businesses don't work when businesses aren't designed to be your right. You don't have a right to buy a car. You don't have a right to get a house. You don't have a right to anyone's goods or services. So therefore, I think the conversation from the very beginning is completely, and maybe when I asked the question originally, I'm not necessarily asking, is healthcare itself, like the delivery of healthcare services, is that broken? I'm more talking about the conversation around it. And I think it has to do with do you have a right to healthcare? I think that many on the right would say, yeah, you can go to any emergency room. They can't deny you. They will take care of you. They will save your life. But you don't have the right to that. You didn't buy insurance. You didn't do the productive thing in our society. So you don't have a right to that health insurance. You have to pay for it, so to speak. So that is, I think, where the conversation kind of gets a little disjointed. And so, yeah, I like to jump into where the pressure points are as I see them. So what do you guys think about that? Matt, you look like you had something to say to that.
I had a very similar thought. So when you're talking about the healthcare system, a lot of people talk about healthcare for all, and they talk about it in terms which are very moral. So they're using moral arguments, like the argument that you mentioned that comes up very frequently, that we're the wealthiest nation in the world, and yet we have a dysfunctional healthcare system. We spend twice as much money for half as much actual healthcare. And that is, by its nature, a moral argument, because you're arguing that this should be better. This should be different than it is. So when you do that, you have to then also expand it a little further. So if we have a social responsibility to people that we actually care for their needs, healthcare wise. If that's somebody's responsibility, not if something you buy, but if it's a responsibility, socially speaking, then where does that responsibility end? So if I have a responsibility to help the system that's going to take care of my neighbor, as I have a responsibility to help the system that provides roads that I use, where does that end? Does that end just in my state, in my country? Do I have any obligations to the people in Philippines that are manufacturing the products that I use? Is it like a universal type of, where's the line here? What is my neighbor? Um, and I think when you start looking at it that way, it becomes a little bit less tenable to keep it a moral imperative that healthcare be provided for people who can't afford it. I think it is a good thing, but as far as being a moral imperative that we have healthcare for all, I can't see making that argument being anything logical. It's emotionally appealing, but it's not logical, because even though we are the wealthiest country in the we're the wealthiest country in the world, the United States is not responsible for the welfare of everybody around the world. That even those with whom we trade and from whom we get healthcare products, the factories that manufacture them in China are not necessarily our responsibility, and nobody's arguing that they are. So the question is, if you're going to make it a moral argument, where does the moral argument end? So I would say that there's a problem there, because for most of the history of the world, even though healthcare was available, it was very questionable what quality what that it was, and nobody considered it a moral imperative that you have it. Food is necessary. Healthcare, though, is not, strictly speaking, necessary. So
I'm gonna, well,
good.
I don't
Yeah, go
want
ahead.
to cut short there a little bit, but I tend to agree, but looking at it in a different way. And again, I think it's how you look at it.
Mhm.
Calling something a right, um, the right to bear arms. Does that mean the government has to give me a gun? Um, is that what that means? What does a right cover? Um, uh, the right for free speech. Does that mean that I can go to any newspaper and say, I have a right to say this and you are obligated to print it?
Right.
If you don't print what I say, then, you know, uh, we close you down, the government, you know, whatever. So it goes back maybe fundamentally to what is a right? Why is it a right? Is it something that we can say is, you know, goes back to founding. These rights go back to the nature of man and his relationship with one another,
Right.
and um, it has to do with what God has given us, you know, in that, and it's something that the government doesn't give us. And I tend to say, if the government hasn't, if we haven't come to the conclusion by now that this is a right, um, and just are willing to stand up and rebel and say that, you know, this is our right, and go to the, you know, the government, um, and protect it. I mean, if it isn't something that we see clearly there, um, you know, maybe it's not a right. And then I would go with, you know, Matthew's, what does that right mean if it is right? You know, where did we limit that right? So we're getting into the definitions there. You've got to present a case that it's an inalienable right. It's something inherent within things, and um, you know, that's the only way. If you can come up with an argument that way and show what it means and doesn't mean, you know, possibly. And I think that's the difficulty. If I'm a doctor, am I forced to, or is somebody forced into becoming it? I don't know.
So here's,
Very soft.
yeah, I think this is a great place to start the conversation. I really like this, where this is going. And I like that we're noodling around on these ideas and these concepts of is a right or not a right. I would say that to me, it's sort of like the social construct conversation that we had. What goes in, what deserves to go in the basket of things that are in the social contract. Generally speaking, we've accepted that education should go in there because we look around and we want to have an educated population around us. We talked about that, do you have a right to that free education given by, the government? Or
I think we're mixing terms here. Social contract is different than a right. A social contract is something we can come to agreement on, and we can come on an agreement on all kinds of things that we could later come back to and take out of that social contract.
Well, and that's where I think the conversation is very frustrating.
Where a right says the government cannot take this from me.
Yeah.
It's not the government's to give. It is God given. I have,
Yeah. And I'm not arguing against that. Actually, I'm saying that there's the concept of it being a right that seems like it's too far. And then there's the concept of if it's just an insurance, if it's just a business, if it's just something there, we're leaving people out of our society that should be included. We should be taking care of people. I think that we have some obligation. I'm not saying that we have it to the level of a right. It's not a right to that healthcare, but I think you have just similar to education. I think this is one of the things that deserves to be in the basket, so to speak. And if you're saying that everything in the basket has to be a right, then maybe is that what you were saying? Let me ask.
Yeah, I'm saying we can have things in the basket that are not a right, that we can agree upon, that excludes federal government. Okay, we can agree that we need to provide education. Education is in the interest of society.
Right.
Now that's a broad item in the basket. Is it a right? No, I would say it's not a right.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with
right to an education.
Yeah.
We don't owe that to other people, but as a society, it's
something we chose to do. Yeah.
Right. And is it something that the federal government should be part of? And can we push back and say, no, there are parental rights, which are God-given rights. They're rights. They're not part of the social contract.
Right.
They are God-given rights in which the parent can say, the federal government cannot teach that.
Right.
Has no place in doing these things. And we can chase a rabbit hole, on some of the things that are going on right now, that the government is making part of education in which they are taking over parental rights.
Right. But I want to say,
so there's within that, when we're talking about education, we are talking about rights, parental rights, and we are talking about a social contract agreement. It is actually the parents' rights, responsibility to teach their children.
Right.
Now, as parents, we may get into a social contract that says, help me when doing this.
Right.
We, as taking care of ourselves, taking care of our family, taking care of our elderly parents, whatever it is, may get into a social contract that says, wow, we want to be able to take care of our own. We want to make sure that our kids are not dying of, something that can be treated just because I don't have, $1,000 to go get this little thing taken care of. And now they are maimed for life because they couldn't get ear surgery and they have infections and things like that. And we as a society say, yeah, that's not right.
Right.
So it is not your right to demand that me and the government take care of you. It is a part of a social contract that says, okay, you have the parental right and responsibility to take care of your kid. We're going to help you, and this is the way we're going to do it. And the government can't come in and say, you have to have health care. You have to pay for everybody's whatever. No, I think we can come in and say, okay, we're going to do this as a social contract. There's no rights in here whatsoever.
Yeah.
And say, we're going to agree to do this, work this together. And maybe we think, and part of the social contract could be, we are going to do this all socialized. Everybody's paying into the pot, everybody's doing this, blah, blah, blah. Or we can say, wow, we have this, either all done through, some other system, type thing. And I don't know. So I've ranted a little bit.
No, you're fine. You're fine. And that brings up a lot of things that I was trying to get to. And I think that it's similar to, I used the education as an example, and that was fine. But I also want to use, what's it called? Military defense also is the exact example of this. You don't have the right to the military coming and sitting outside to keep you safe from other people, right? You don't have the right to have but you do have the right for society to be protected from outside invaders by our military. So we pay taxes so that happens for the mutual defense of everyone. But as far as if I want to put, I want to buy insurance for my house, I want to put Ring cameras up, I want to do something with my security, I want to put fence around it, I should be able to defend myself and insulate myself to the degree that I feel is necessary based on the given risk around me. And I think that I'm not trying to, what my ideal situation would not be to take away private insurance and replace it with socialized or government run healthcare. But I think that we have to have something that we are all paying for. And in my mind, it should be on the local level, right? We should pay our cities to build a clinic, like we pay our cities to build police stations to keep us safe. We should build, hospitals. I think that should be something that we have that is taxpayer funded, that is for an emergency situation. And then you also, to the degree that you want additional healthcare, I think we have to have clinics around the country that can take care of like catastrophic things where you get cancer, or structure some way to supplement, because the long-term treatment of disease that can cost millions of dollars through cancer treatments and things like that you have to have right now is not sustainable for these insurance policies. Unless you have everybody buy it, you're spreading the risk around a lot, which you can do. But I'm trying to distinguish. There's like a business aspect of this healthcare, and then there's a aspect of the universality of keeping people, giving basic healthcare to people, basic access to people's healthcare. That right now the insurance companies and hospitals are having to compensate and overcharge and price gouge, and they're monopolies, so to speak, and they're all working together, and we have basically the worst of all worlds imaginable. Because I think it's like a lot of, I get on my soapbox a lot on this channel about how the right thinks about it in these like black and white terms, and the left thinks about it in these black and white terms, and sometimes they're not even talking about the same thing. Because most people that on the right say, yeah, if you go to the hospital, you should be, you shouldn't be denied care You know, if you cut your leg off and you don't have insurance, the doctor should be able to save your life. Like, everybody agrees on that. And the right left would say that's universal basic healthcare that we need. And the right says we already have that. But you say, okay, but then they get a bill for $10 million or $10,000, 10 million, whoo, goodness, $10,000. And the reason why the insurance, why the hospital has to charge you that is because the likelihood of you paying any of that is very little, but some people are going to pay something, and it can help offset those costs. So the system is super, you can't run a business where you have to take everyone. So it's like, to me, the right side of the political argument is speaking out of both sides of their mouth just as much as the left is. Because they're like, you have to take everybody and you have to treat these things, but it's a business. Okay, so if you do that, you basically have what we have right now. It's this two-headed monster that doesn't make any sense. The incentives are not correct. If it's a market, then it should have market forces that can drive it down, you know, and it should have competition in these things. That doesn't exist and can't exist when you have to offer your service to everyone. You know, if I cut my leg off and I'm like, okay, this hospital's cheaper, that one's going to cost me an arm and a leg, but I've already lost my leg. So it's not,
can't afford to pay my leg.
And I think some things, I think some things have been created because of some of this that you're talking about. We're moving some things in the right direction. We have these emergency cares things, where before, where you broke your toe, you think, or maybe you've twisted your ankle, but you don't know whether it's broke, and you need an X-ray, and you need it maybe set or something like that. And the only option was to go, if you didn't have money, to go to the
ER,
the hospital, the ER, because they were forced to take you, kind of thing. And you can't afford that. Where emergency cares are popping up everywhere and a little bit more affordable, you may be out a couple $100 maybe, and even for some families, I mean, there's times in my life, I'm paycheck to paycheck, 7 kids, whatever. It may take me a while to pay that. But it's better than it was. And I think that's where the market says, yeah, there's money to be made. We can do it efficiently in something other than an ER room. You get to the ER room, not only are they going to fix your foot, they're going to put a heart monitor on you. They're going to 10 different doctors that are in the hospital that are never going to see you, but are there in case something goes wrong. They're all going to bill you because that's part of the system. That irritates me, having a baby and 5 other doctors who
that's your free market.
Wrong, all bill you. Yeah, that's your, So there's all these,
but you don't have any say in it. So it's not a market.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. This is the crux of all of it. Because the doctors don't have options, they have to feel like they have to, and in some cases they do have to offset it so that they can exist, so that doctors can exist in certain to a certain extent, right? So the problem is you have to somehow deconstruct healthcare, in my mind, where you take the part of it that we'll call it social construct, social what contract. That's what I was trying to think. Sorry. Yeah. The social contract part that we were talking about earlier, where you should, there's just a reasonable expectation in an advanced society that we educate our kids, that we have a military that protects us from invaders, and then we have healthcare where if you cut your leg off, that you can be taken care of. You have a police force that if you call them, they'll come and take care of the bad guys. We should have that. at a local level that is paid for by your taxes, just like the police are, just like the military is, that is at a local level. It is not the federal government. It is your city government that takes care of that aspect of it. And you can, just like you have a sheriff that you elect, you could have a chief medical officer of the county or whatever.
And there are places that exist that like that. I don't know all the details. I know that my dad was part of something called Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser. Permanente. Yeah. Stumble over that. Anything called Kaiser just makes me a little nervous, right? But it was a hospital in growing up in the Cleveland area that my parents were part of, and that met their needs. Was run differently. It was run like they were the insurance company. You pay the hospital, and the hospital, in order to make money, needs to make sure that you remain healthy, not that you're billed for everything because they or have unnecessary stuff. So there's there's possibilities. So I think there are, like the book Outlier, you look for things that work and work well, and then you say, maybe we ought to move to that model. So I think your model is a good model. There are always going to be maybe some things that will need government subsidized because you have poor neighborhoods, poor communities, that type thing.
Yeah.
Where
also,
we have to kind of make up, for that. But I don't like the idea of government run things.
Right. And that's
for the most part.
and that's
And you
fine. And that's totally fine. And that's valuable. And I think that we need to hold these things in account. But I think that, like I said, I think that there has to be somewhat of a balance here. Just like with education, you still have private education, you still have homeschooling options, you still have options that you can take care of. But in general, you're giving the maximum available benefit at a certain level that is necessary, just like at a basic level. And then you still have private insurance. Now the insurance company doesn't have to cover these crazy, ridiculous costs. So now I can offer it way cheaper. And I can get more people. Everybody can get a cheaper policy, and you have to have good pricing, transparent pricing. Somebody in one of the videos, I think I sent you guys for reference, was talking about how you don't go into a Starbucks and they tell you, okay, here's your coffee, and you go, okay, how much is it? And it's like, okay, we'll drink it first, and then I'll tell you how much it is. We'll send you the bill later. That is simply ridiculous. And I know from working in,
do you want your coffee
in the healthcare field that when somebody calls, you don't tell them how much it costs for a crown or a root canal or filling, because, well, number one, there's just a obvious reason. I don't know if your tooth actually needs a crown over the phone. I can't tell you the price of that, but I should be able to tell you what the price of a crown is. You know what I mean? But there are other factors. I just have to educate you that, you might need a root canal. The better treatment might be extracting it and putting in some other type of prosthetic or a implant, or there's other things that go on. But the fact of the matter is most doctors, generally speaking, will not tell you, for a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons was, I gave you some valid reasons. One of the other reasons is because I don't want to tell you what the cost of my services are. Because if you knew how much of the insurance is reimbursing me and how much it is for cash paying, and if you have this insurance, they pay me this, and then TennCare or Medicaid pays me half that price. I get half price crowns. And then so it's okay, so if you're willing to take that patient and do that crown at half the price, then why can't you give me a 50% discount as a cash paying patient? Yeah. So there's things that you don't want to upset the apple cart, and you kind of want to keep the illusion going, because it's better for you as a business, because there isn't a place where I'm not competing. There's just nowhere else you can go right now. I'm not going to tell you
Yeah.
what the price of my crown is. They're not going to tell you the price of their crown. Whatever. You just got to make a decision, and one of us is going to get it because you've got to get it taken care of. You know, if
Yeah.
you have abscess or whatever.
Seth Godin talks about the race to the bottom. You know, and yeah, you might walk into this clinic, you know, that hasn't paid for somebody cleaning, you know, the equipment or whatever because they can't, because they've raced to the bottom. You know,
Right.
it looks like more like, you know, a unmanaged McDonald's, you know, restaurant that hasn't been cleaned in a while.
There's a
You
lot
know?
of ways to race to the bottom, though. So the problem with socialized medicine in general is, so obviously Britain's been doing this, and they've been doing a pretty good job. So it's not all socialized medicine, but what is given to is disincentivizing the people who are giving the service, and you really, really, really want to avoid that. So the problem is that the problem is that the people who are giving the service expect to make money. And there's been a number of places where people have come from, say, communist countries or things like that, that have socialized their medicine, that they have realized that they can make the same amount of money being a bricklayer as they could being a doctor. So they became a bricklayer. They studied for it and they wanted to do it, but then there was no money in it and a ton of responsibility and pain, you know, to doing this, to offering that service. And there was nothing to offset it because the incentive was disassociated from the service. And you've got to be very careful about doing that.
No, and I hope you don't think that that's what I'm saying. I mean, being somebody that works in the healthcare field, I think that healthcare providers, doctors, dentists, nurses should be paid more than they are right now. And it's ridiculous. They socialized medicine, but what I'm not advocating for in this is that. What I want is a hybrid that works, something we can wrap our head around, something that actually addresses the core of the problem, something that addresses what you were saying. We don't want socialized medicine. We don't want to take away the incentives, but we realize there's an aspect in healthcare that the incentive structure can never be met. It's not a business. Healthcare cannot be an effective business model if everyone is a customer, if it's a right. So it seems like you have where you go too far into this, like socialized medicine, you got Canada, you got the, you know, England's service, and those people are coming over here to get healthcare, you know, like, and so
medicine.
Yeah. So we know that that's not a great model.
People from you know, Europe are going to where there are socialized medicine places, and the socialized medicine places are saying, oh, okay, that's because we've got a system that works. We take care of people. So that's the thing, is that you could make that argument both ways. The reason I brought it up, though, wasn't because
I did on purpose.
I'm sorry. It wasn't because I thought that yourself or Dad or anyone else, you know, for the most part, was that we want, or that would watch us, would be likely to do that. But people are looking for answers right now, and the people that are on this may be looking beyond their own camp. Many of them have thought that, hey, socializing medicine is going to be a great idea, and I'm trying to give a good reason of why that's not. Because the problem is you've got catastrophic costs as a moral dilemma, and a lot of people feel that it is catastrophic costs being a moral dilemma. But then you also have the day-to-day business side of things, and it looks like socialized medicine covers both of those. It really just looks like we're not doing it right because, you know, we don't think that there's enough, you know, we don't care about our neighbor enough. And I want to emphasize that that's not the case, because if you say, okay, socialized medicine is a great idea, and that's going to care for your neighbor better, you have to look to examples where that's been implemented, and the failure is in that relationship. And what ends up happening is that good doctors quit and all you have left is doctors.
And I would, I think, if I pick up a little bit of what you said, Matt, you know, we have to work on the extremes. We need to have, because of human nature, we need to have incentives. That means that not every time that somebody sneezes that they run to a doctor. If they're that way, then, you know, they need to pay. You know what I mean? You want to go that often? Fine, you can go that often, and there's hypochondriacs and different things like that, that if there's something out there, they're going to, take. And then the other end is, just because we can do some kind of like surgery to prolong your life another 8 weeks, we're obligated to do that for you and your family and your loved ones and all of that. And there has, caps seem awful. I mean, because once you reach your cap, if you don't have additional money, you're going to die. But that's part of like me understanding that, I'm going to die. It's not worth all of this money unless I'm willing, unless I have it and willing to pay it. I can't force society to pay for something so expensive, because then we're hurting people at the other end. We're hurting other people if we're allowing it. So there always has to be caps, and not that you can't get it, you can pay for it. There should never be a cap that says, you can't pay for your own whatever. You can fund, Bill Gates can fund whatever hospital he wants to, and prolong his life any way he wants to. And best to you. You're just going to be older and die of something worse. My feeling, dying isn't that bad a deal, for us that are prepared. Same time, I think we need to have cost built into where it's out-of-pocket expenses for things, but we may have to kind of give a $1,000 whatever to people in a certain income that they can use in those instances, and maybe even let it accumulate, whatever. But at a certain point, but they can use that for out of what other people middle bracket and beyond have to pay, kind of thing. It's kind of like having a food stamp, card or something along that line. And in some cases, type thing. So there's something to be said there too for the for people. I think it's helpful as a society to have a safety net there, and again, not as a right, but as something that we have there. And
Yeah.
So I don't know how close in agreement we are with you.
Well, I didn't really ever
Mark,
finish everything that I was trying to say, but so
cut you off, huh?
Yeah, but so I'll try again. So no, it's okay, because those, it all helps build. So basically, like I was saying, that I think that there should be sort of a underlying something that is there, that's provided by your local municipality, by your county level, something like that. And I think that should be taxpayer funded. That should be the only thing that's government funded. Everything else should be, and that covers catastrophic. That does not cover, I have a runny nose. If you come to an emergency clinic with a runny nose looking for free healthcare, go to a clinic and go pay a copay somewhere and, go buy some insurance. It's cheaper now, and go see your visits. I think that there should always be copays no matter what, because that skin in the game element, I think that's really a smart thing. I don't think deductibles make a sense, because you have deductibles like, well, after you meet the deductible, then we'll pay. No, if I'm paying for insurance, you're going to pay. Every time I go in the door, I'll make a copay, because that's my skin in the game. This is me showing up, paying my copay.
I like that too.
I don't like deductibles. So you have the catastrophic care covered. Nobody has to bankrupt themselves because of medical bills now. That is something that is really, really tragic in our society. And we'll do an education episode at some point, because we haven't done that yet. But I have very similar feelings about the damage to the broader society. Most people that file bankruptcy are because of medical bills, and they a lot of times can't pay their medical bills because of student loans and other debts, whatever. But that's the whole other side. But the thing you can bankrupt is medical debt, and that's what a lot of people are doing. I think that is a tragedy for the society as a whole. I think that's a tragedy on an individual level. I think that is a bad thing for insurance companies, and that's where this conversation, I think, is where I'm trying to take this or steer this a little bit. So then you have, for people that, like you said, that can't afford it, you give them flex cards. There's a plan out there with Medicare Advantage, at least on the dental side, because that's what I know is dental, where you have a maximum or whatever. You have your plan. It's a good plan. It covers everything. And then you also have a flex card. So when it maxes out, you still have some cash there. You can use that for copays or whatever. We need to be able to offer, people that are, on the lower income spectrum, something like that, so that you can afford, a plan that is, reasonable. But if you make a certain amount of money, then you just pay for your own plan. So all of these insurance companies who will have to have transparent fee schedules, they have to have transparent, billing processes. And the medical industry right now, like the number of codes you have basically stays the same. It doesn't make any sense because we're constantly learning more things and more procedures. And it seems like the medical billing and coding industry is just stuck in a like a time capsule. Like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you have your poor people, you have catastrophic care covered, and then everybody else goes into this. If you're not poor and you're not having a catastrophic thing, you go out and shop for insurance. That makes the market for insurance an actual competitive place for care, for doctors, who's in network, who's not in network, all these different credentialing things. You don't actually change the system that much, but you change like the most important dynamic. And I think a lot of people say, well, we don't want socialist medicine. We want a hybrid system where it takes care of the social safety net of all the poor people. And that's what we've got. So basically, we've got the system you're describing. I would submit that we are not having the system that I'm describing at all. I think we have like I said, a worst of both worlds, worst of the socialized medicine aspect and worst of what you get out of a society and companies that think that they have to cover everything. So they have to offset this. Because they're not working in a fair market, they create a mess. And with the government overstepping and not paying what the other insurance pay. I mean, don't go to a dentist if you have like Medicaid and make a stink, because you're the first person they're going to be like, okay, refer you out. Because I mean, if I'm getting paid half of what I'm getting paid for somebody else, and you're giving me a hard time as a patient, I'm going to send you out. It doesn't make sense to like, okay, like whatever, work with you. So people on Medicaid are second-class citizens, which is a tragedy. Like it hurts my heart, really thinking about that in that way. But that's how it is. And I think that that's a dynamic that needs to be changed. And so what I'm getting to, or finally got to, so we guys want to throw some things at that, or anything to break apart there, or questions on that?
I didn't come up with any questions to ask. And as far as like disagreements, not so much. It's the one accusation that people may have is that it's sort of a pie in the sky approach, is like, okay, so that's, where you want to get to, but how are you going to do that? How are you going to pay for it? That kind of thing. But,
well, okay, so I'll address that. That's a great criticism, actually. So I thought about this a lot. So if you in tandem with other things that I think, have we talked about in the education episode? Well, we're going to talk about in this education part too, but I had a concept of where school districts, they're all gerrymandered and ridiculous right now. So if you were to just make a county and everyone in that county gets equal amount of funds from there, then you would fix a lot of the issues with gerrymandering. You just sort of like tie these things together. You make them in lockstep. So the county lines don't move. They can't be gerrymandered. The districts of where the representatives can be all gerrymandered and everywhere, but the district itself of like a county isn't moving, and the funds of that school district are within that county. So that's where the money comes from. So basically, you tie your healthcare and your taxes to that county, and you have your city counter, your county mayor, whatever, decide how much that is on the taxes, and then you have a tax increase. And at the first part, maybe you have the government subsidized part of that. You know, there's the federal government subsidized it to get it off the ground, get the hospitals built, but then the operational cost after that are, you know, there's a transition period where it's funded by the, you know, local establishment, local elected officials. So that's how you get that started. I don't think it's pie in the sky, because you basically do away with a lot of, you know, you're cutting as much as you're adding, because you're not going to socialized medicine, and you're not going all the way to just everything's commercial now, just, you know, Wild West medicine. So you're basically taking the system and changing, you know, where things go. So you're not really affecting that much, I don't think. I think that as far as when you're talking about like, so how do you do it? I think that's one method how. I think there's plenty of methods how, and I think you let the states kind of figure some of that out as they're supposed to do. But do I think that this is likely to happen? You know, do I think politicians, you know, want to do it?
Hopeful, yeah, good ideas. I mean, it all starts with, you know, that's the power of an idea. Is,
well, sometimes, you know, I think that I like you're saying, I think it's partially the idea, but I think it's also, it's just a common sense conclusion to me when you think about what the actual problem is. Yeah. Why people can't talk to each other about this issue. Because all of these things we were watching, you know, reference videos that we're sending back and forth, they're talking about, you know, it's a right. And it's like, then this side would just come and tear that person apart. It's not a right because blah, 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 blah. And then I'd see the, you know, the left coming, you know, oh, it's got to be a free market, whatever. And these guys just tearing them up. And I'm like, man, they're both right. You know, it's like, they're both right. And that's what got, well, and it's been a long time thought as well. So it's sort of like a culmination of a lot of these things where it's like, it's not a right, but it's something that we should do, right? Like it's something that we can do, but how do we do it in the way that's most true to America and that's most true to what our values as a society are, and how we, you know, as a federal, you know, states, you know, rights type thing. You know, I hate using that sometimes because people throw a lot of racism in there with states' rights, but you get what I'm saying there, I think. So yeah, you look like
I
say something
though too is those in the medical field. We have large hospitals that are more religiously connected and still somewhat are. You know, you have your Catholic charities, you have your Methodist hospitals, your Baptist hospitals, and things along the line. And I think that if some of those large now corporations would look at changing themselves and changing themselves radically. I mean, just, you know, take it on, you know, like a company that's getting beat down, you know, like Ford or something, you know, by Toyota, or maybe we just need, you know, some Japanese company to come in and start a hospital and, you know, and do, you know, kick everybody's butt where everybody goes like, oh, maybe
this is how we should be doing things.
Ford, you know, company, and we need to change, you know, kind of thing.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I overlooked in Matt's question. That's actually a part of that. What do you do with the existing hospitals and how they exist, function? And I think that what you have here is what is called the innovator's dilemma or something, where if you're at the top of the game, you have no incentive to disrupt the industry, right? So, you know,
sometimes you can't even you're not even sure you can survive the interruption. If you disrupt your own industry, how will you survive to where you get it better, you know?
So you give options to the hospitals. The hospitals have a choice. You either completely go to the insurance model where you get in network with people who, oh, and there's another thing that I need to talk about, and that's employer based healthcare, yeah, where the employees buy it. So actually that's important to address before I go. So I'll come back to this innovation dilemma. But first of all, we should never have tied employees' benefits, insurance people's insurance benefits to their employment. That was never a great idea. It started out where people were, working in businesses until they retired, and that was a little bit more fine. You keep your healthcare for a long, long time. Now people, the average they stay at a job is about 2 years. So you're switching insurance every 2 years. It's a absolutely not viable in this modern way that society functions anymore.
Right.
So it's not viable. That's first of all. Second of all, in addition to not being happened, I think it should be banned. You should completely ban from doing that. And when, there was a guy who was talking about how economists were, was given the chance to like look through these different insurance plans to pick their best one. And he's like, just like a very, I can't remember, prestigious economist. So I'm messing up the story here a little bit, but anyway, the concept holds. And, he was looking through the different plans and he's like, I can't tell the difference. I can't tell which one's the best one and then not, which one's not the best one. And, it's like nobody can, when you're shopping for your own plan, nobody can tell what the, best one is and what isn't, because they're all basically, it's so convoluted.
When Obamacare came out, I may not be the brightest guy, but I'm not exactly dumb. I have a master's degree. I am very detailed oriented, looking at stuff.
Mhm.
I had the same problem trying to figure out what this will do as opposed to that, and what my risk management deal is, and what I'll be out of pocket should this.
Yeah.
And it's all depends on what life brings you. I might have bought the right one if this scenario happens.
Right.
But if that scenario doesn't happen,
It's nearly
I'm
impossible.
out of luck, or whatever, kind of thing. So it is difficult because you don't know the what ifs and, all the fine print and stuff, and you can't look through very many and do a comparison.
Yeah.
I did the same thing, at retirement, looking at, for me personally, it was fairly easy. I thought, well, if anything catastrophic happens, I have VA to fall on, which maybe isn't a great option in itself, but it's something. I have good health, so I don't really want to pay a lot for medicine, particularly. So I'm just going to take the Medicare, and I'm going to rest on, VA. Now, my wife, is a different issue, because she has diabetes, some high blood pressure, cholesterol, different things going on in her life. And so I had to weigh out a way different, different scenario, and yet be able to, afford it and not feel like I'm limiting her life for something small that might come up, that maybe something I'm like going to go bankrupt on, type
No,
thing.
it's a total disaster, and it doesn't make sense, and it's not transparent. And if insurance companies, number one, like I said, there was more transparency laws, if it wasn't, you didn't have to cover the catastrophic things in the first place, and there was a way to differentiate some of these stuff. And that's what's really frustrating about this conversation, is sometimes I think that you get economists in the conversation and they talk about it in terms of like the business side and everything, and then you get medical doctors and they're talking about how all this medical stuff doesn't make sense with what they're talking about, and then you put them together in a room and it's like talking completely past each other, and it's there's a language barrier here. And so you have to get somebody who is very versed in healthcare verbiage and what actual diseases there are, but someone is also enough of a layman to be able to, okay, I know what that means. I know exactly what that means. So then I have to convert that to average everyday people, where they can understand it. And then I have to be educated enough in the financial sense so that I can talk about how much this on a financial impact is going to be on a person. And somebody who's an actuary can't know all that stuff, or doesn't know all that stuff, is not trained in all that stuff. So the person who fixes our healthcare system needs to be somebody like a mid-level or is likely to be, in my mind, a mid-level person in the medical field, whether they're a physician assistant, a nurse, medical laboratory technician, dental hygienist. I don't know what it is. Somebody mid-level, maybe not a doctor, maybe not, but somebody that is enough versed in healthcare issues, financial systems, and how that works, and is able to marry all this stuff together and then can communicate that to the masses. Because that is, to me, I get really frustrated from being a medical laboratory scientist myself. Sometimes when I hear people talking about COVID, I get really, really frustrated. People throwing around words that they know enough about what they're saying, but they don't know enough about what that means, And I can only imagine people in the in business world that, listen to some people talk, and just don't, like, you're saying this, that equals this, but you're like not seeing the greater impact on society.
We call that sophomore people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Soft meaning wise, more as in moron, wise fools.
Fool.
They're not freshmen, they're sophomores.
Yeah.
They're not juniors or seniors, and they know enough to be dangerous. So the sophomore level, person there. And you have to go through being a sophomore to become a junior and senior, but sophomores are dangerous.
But so getting back to the innovation dilemma and how do hospitals handle this transition that I'm suggesting, I think that the hospitals can be purchased by the county that they're in, and probably some of them will need to be, maybe one or two if you're in a big city. One or two systems or hospital systems get purchased by there and offer that catastrophic care. The other hospitals will transition into, like I said, buying these different plans, or getting in network contracts with all the different insurance plans. Then you're effectively opening up the market to a lot of different insurance companies now that are sort of being held back by the big boys, the bigger insurance companies. Now more people can get in the game and offer health benefits because it's a lot more of a easy to decipher what's going on in the marketplace because of the transparency, and a lot more people. It removes some of the barriers to entry for insurance companies to offer products. And you would have to, like I said, the legislation needs to be made by somebody who can translate, a lot of these things, or a team of people that can translate these things and make it so that it could happen. So this is not just an easy, president gets elected, he's got this running on this platform, and then he comes out and he just executive orders it. I mean, this is going to be a policy probably that is in long time in the works. It's had a lot of contributions to it, and it's something that a person can adopt into it and get it passed through, Congress or whatever, and get it elected.
I see there, you have two things to be concerned about. You mentioned both of them. One is the law, and sometimes taking away some things that the law has done in interfering with the process, and Congress and there's definite problem there, because people will try to put pressure on to make things go one way or the other, or disagree. It will be a difficult transition, I think, because it means coming to a consensus.
It's an impossible.
It's possible. I think it is possible.
I don't, and I and I suggested it.
It's difficult.
I don't think it's possible.
I agree. It is a huge problem, and the other would be the people that already have stakes in the you have to have you have insurance company that's going to be disruptive to them. You're going to have, and of course they've got billions to throw into this fight to make it stay the way, or push it in a direction that makes it better for them. And you have the whole market area and stockholders and things like that, and the relationship, and then you have there was a third group I was thinking about, and I lost my thought there. But we've got laws and precedents and things along the line. There's just it's a huge thing because it affects every part of our country, and there'll be winners and losers.
Yeah.
But there, as in any winners and losers, the losers have an opportunity to not just hang on to.
Unfortunately, the losers are in office right now most of the time. So, wait, what losers are we
Those
talking
that might
about?
lose, right?
Yeah, no.
Things get changed.
So the reason why I said it's impossible is because I don't see it happening. There's that, who is it, Stalin or Lenin or somebody has said that decades happen and then in a few weeks, I'm slaughtering this. Nothing happens for decades, but in a few weeks, decades happen. Like decades worth of change basically happens in a few weeks. And I think that, we're in the cycle of history where, weak men produce hard times and hard times produce, strong men. So we're about to hit that. We're in like that overlap where we have a weak society. And I think that we have a lot of weak people in power. I'm not just talking about the president. I'm talking about morally, spiritually, weak people not in government and in business. I think that the rot in both of these places is so bad that it's like a shed that's like dry wadding, and eventually wind's going to push it over. It's just a matter of time. It might not be, till I'm, maybe 10 years from now. It might be 20 years from now. It might, go even longer. I don't know. I suspect it won't go that long, especially with what we're seeing with, Ukraine and the shift in, we went from a unipolar world to a bipolar world. Now with China, being the reserve currency for Russia now, which I think that when you look back at history, that this chapter that we've been in since Russia invaded Ukraine has changed a lot of things. And we're going to look back at it and say, wow, that was kind of a big moment, but we just sort of lived through it, and you don't see it always right in that moment. But I think it changed the dynamic. I think we saw who's going to stand with who when World War III breaks out. You know what I mean? Like the battle lines were kind of set there, and we kind of saw, and I don't think we made some great calculations, and we've hardened lines that were soft for a long time, and this is getting off into, another episode that we'll do about China eventually, next, probably, if we don't do the healthcare debate. I mean, the education part too next, because I want to talk about China. It's very important, I think, to talk about that. And then, but yeah, so I think that this might come from post a recession or post a war or something where everything gets, shaken up enough that the status quo can't stand anymore. And I don't think that, I think the solution, some people, I don't think the solution will be socialized medicine, even though I think a lot of people will be calling for that, and people are calling for that right now, because I think that, this is America, number one, and I don't think that that's going to be palatable. So I don't think a single payer socialist, system is coming. But I think that the current existing situation, the cost of healthcare has gotten so ridiculously high. I think we saw with COVID how ineffective it was. And logistically speaking, I think that exposed a whole lot of things in our healthcare system. Our nurses are burnt out. Our doctors are stressed out. Everything is, it's a really, 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 really bad time for healthcare right now.
Talk about other kinds of solutions too. I think there's, and I think we need to wrap up here, but at some point talking about lawyers and lawsuits and things like that interfering with medicine. I think we also need to talk about innovation. Just recently, this past week, we heard about a nurse
The
being
Vanderbilt.
being prosecuted for manslaughter or something. I'm not sure what the term was, but I mean, criminal charges there type thing. And see posts by nurses saying, this is, what we're working with. There's all this stuff and disconnect.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, what we'll probably end up doing is adding more laws. And hospitals will have all kinds of, we have to sign away your life, that the hospital's not, blah, blah, blah. There's going to be lawyering up. There's going to be all kinds of stuff go wrong when somebody needs to come up with an app on the nurse's phone, that every nurse can download, for $20 or whatever, that connects to the system, that tells them what they can pick and what they can't pick out of the shelf.
Well,
I mean,
here's
we're not
biggest.
We're looking at this criminal case because of a system that's dysfunctional, where we have the capability of building an app.
I don't think an app would have cased it. It would have helped in this case,
something.
but the problem is like the lawyer, the hospitals can shield it completely from that person dying by a mistake. The problem is the nurse should have been stood behind. The hospital should stand behind its nurses. The hospital should say, we took her license away. She can no longer do this. She made a mistake. The software didn't open the correct drawer. She should have looked. That was human error. She's out of here. I'm sorry, like pay the whatever, like the hospital is protected. But then the DEA comes after her and it's like, now you're going to jail. It's like, why are we attacking the nursing profession when you make a mistake? People die. It's a matter of time.
Yeah,
it's
we need to hold that for another.
But I think it is important to talk about the hospital's culture in general is to stand for the hospital. It's not to stand for the nurses and doctors and the technicians and all that stuff. And that's a problem. And I think that
but it also goes back to incentives, which is part of our conversation.
Which is part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think, we can do some parting thoughts and then wrap this up because it's been a long episode and, probably at about where we want to be. So do you guys have any parting thoughts? And then I'll wrap this out.
Parting thought is, huh? What?
I love you, man.
Oh, okay.
Parting thought. So one of the things that we have to remember when we deal with anything is that in order to fix a problem, you have to be able to identify the problem. And part of identifying the problem is identifying the philosophical underpinnings. And that's where I think my opening comment kind of was trying to aim at, is that when we try to identify the problem and fix a solution and things like that, you have to identify whether it's a moral problem you're dealing with. You have to deal with it philosophically. If you bypass philosophy and you go straight to tautologies, straight to, truisms and saying, it's a right that everybody should have it, we're the wealthiest, you're going to get messed up. You have to start with what the problem is and correctly identifying it. If you don't correctly identify the problem, you can't fix it. And one of the problems that we've barely touched on, which is very important to this, but there's so many people talking about it, is the problem of monopolies. The government as a single payer would be a monopoly. The healthcare insurance is another monopoly. The hospital itself, the fact that it can shield itself is because it is a monopoly, in that situation we were talking about. So antitrust has to feature in the larger conversation. So when you're thinking about these things, there's more that has to be thought about than what we have time to deal with. So if you really want to fix the problem, you can't take simplistic solutions. You have to start with dealing with the philosophical aspects of it and work through that. That's where we've been coming from, and we're trying to talk to it, but we're just not able to talk to it into the depth that you need to be able to think through this process and come to solutions. So that would be my parting thought to all viewers.
That's great. Dad?
I was just looking at my background and thinking, we're looking at core issues to the heart of the tree, right? I don't think I like Matthew's conclusion. I like your ideas. John Mark, I think you guys are spot on.
Yeah. So I'll just sum up basically. So I don't know exactly how to fix it. I've got some ideas. I know what to do. I don't know how to do it. I know what the problem is. And the problem is that, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about, the moral aspect, and we're talking about the market aspect. These are separate things. Then, like Matt said, it's not a simple solution. There is no, you fix it with XYZ. You can't do either one. You have to fix this problem and this problem. They're separate problems in order to fix it. And no other country, I don't think that there's a model out there that does anything like this. And so we have to innovate, and innovating means disrupting some existing things that are going to be hard to do that. It's going to take courage. It's going to take a lot of things. And like also Matt mentioned, there are other huge barriers insofar as how our society thinks about these issues and how it functions, monopolies, tech. We need to do an episode on tech one day as well. Supply chain issues, all of these things magnify into an environment where fixing something like the healthcare system is just, it's super complicated. And if we can eliminate, or if we can work on pushing the ball uphill, all those things at the same time is what we have to do. We have to, but I think at some point you have to stop and say, okay, this is a solution for this field. This is a solution for this. This is a solution for healthcare. There's all these different solutions, and we can focus on one at a time, but we need to attack all of them as well. So you have to do all these things simultaneously and then be able to focus. It's a really big task. And I'm excited that we got to talk about this today. We just really scratched the surface on it. But there's a lot of stuff out there that you can watch on these issues. And I hope that you got something valuable out of this episode. And we will see you next time on the Johnny Random Show.